Okay, so the situation is so bad that when I was writing this video, I typed Lollywood into my document and it autocorrected to Bollywood. Then I typed it again, and this time it autocorrected to Hollywood. That's just too much. I mean, if you look at the Pakistani film industry and the cinema industry in general, it's quite a sad picture. And surprisingly, it wasn't always this way. I mean, nowadays, I can barely think of any movie that I was excited to watch which came out of the Pakistani film industry, other than maybe Mola Jat. And even with that movie, I had a lot of pet peeves like no village in Pakistan looks like this, and no girl in a Pakistani village would wear what Humayma Malik or Myra Khan are wearing. But I still liked the movie because the acting was good, the script was nice, it was, something epic was going on. It was actually a very enjoyable movie. I watched it twice. But then I also heard some interviews later on by these film producers and directors, and they talked about how making accurate and realistic sets in Pakistan is such a huge task because the industry just doesn't exist. No wonder this village looked more Mongolian than Pakistani, right? So, how did things get so bad? Because they weren't always this bad. And I know that our generation, especially, we don't know that once there were good days with the Pakistani cinema. And I only found that out while researching for this video. So, the number of films produced each year have reduced from over 100 in 1970s down to 25 to 40 per year now. And even when we look at the budget that these movies were made into, the overheads for most Pakistani films range from 0.9 to 10 million Pakistani rupees. It might have actually increased in the recent years because of the devaluation of the currency. And if you compare these numbers to what the costs and what the input that goes into films made in India, like in Bollywood, the difference is astronomical. Average Indian films cost between 80 to 100 million, and if you have major stars in a movie, the budget goes from 150 to 250 million, and in some cases has even surpassed the 500 million mark. At this point in time, there's actually no comparison between the film industries of both the countries. But this wasn't always the case. Once, the Pakistani film industry was actually a trailblazer, it was doing great things. So what exactly happened? Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tariq Tales. So the Pakistani film industry was born out of the city of Lahore, and hence the name Lollywood. And Lahore had been the center of cinema in the Indian subcontinent since 1929, even before Pakistan was actually made. And when Pakistan was made in 1947, more than 75% of the people who were involved within the film industry in Lahore migrated to India, which was the first major blow to the industry. The entire industry in Lahore was kind of paralyzed by this huge shift, and there was also no filming equipment and no personnel to handle stuff. But this stunted industry still managed to pull together, and they released their first film from Pakistan, which was called Teri Yaad, on the 7th of August in 1948. It premiered at the Parbat Theatre in Lahore, but unfortunately the film was a huge flop. And it's kind of understandable as to why the film didn't work out, because look at the political situation. This film was released in 1948, and only a year ago partition had taken place, and the areas of Punjab, and especially the city of Lahore, they had seen the worst of the killings and the worst of the migratory settlements. So it's understandable that if people didn't go rushing towards the cinema for this new movie. But the film industry was finally kind of trying to get back on its feet. The following year, we see the launch of Evernew Studios, which later goes on to become one of the largest studios in Pakistan. And it produced a lot of phenomenal films like Chanve, Sassi, Umar Marvi, and then it finally went on to release the film called Do Ansu. Now this film kind of became the break that the Pakistani cinema needed, and it became one of the first films in Pakistan that lasted in cinemas and played over and over again for more than 25 weeks, giving it the Silver Jubilee status. Now these were the 1950s, very interesting times because we also see directors like Noor Jahan, the famous Madam Noor Jahan, coming into the picture, and she directed the movie called Chanve. And during this time period, we also see a lot of films being produced in local languages like Umar Marvi, which was made in the Sindhi language. And the sudden boom of the industry didn't just stop with the movie Do Ansu. The movies Sassi and Chakkewali also became huge hits and lasted in the theatres for more than 50 weeks, giving both of them the Golden Jubilee status. And the film Yakkewali is actually a very interesting one because that became the most profitable film of its time. And if you look at the themes that the film was kind of promoting, it's very, very modern. The film was completely feminist. It's about a woman who supports her own family during the 1950s. And when you look at the fact that such a film got so much attention and so much love and people watched it for so long, it talks about how even the mindsets were so different back then than they are today. And since the film industry was now kind of reviving itself, we also see that it was making its impact on other industries. We saw the advent of film magazines and film awards. A journalist by the name of Ilyas Rashidi launched one of the first annual awarding events in 1958. This was called the Nigar Awards and was an extension of the Nigar magazine, which was also one of the first weekly magazines based on the film industry in Pakistan, and it was quite popular. Then comes the 1960s, and this is where the golden age of the film really shone through, and it's also the time period that where we see black and white films kind of moving out of the picture and colored films were being introduced into the market. Now on 26th May 1961, a movie called Bombay Wala was released in Pakistan. This film was made by K Productions and became one of the first films where we started seeing political intervention within the Pakistani film industry. So this film was basically screened by the censor board, it was approved and then released. But after the release of the film, it kind of caused some tensions between India and Pakistan. And then politicians got involved and it became a huge debacle, and the censor board was heavily blamed for all of this. Then we also started seeing events where politicians like Mohtarma Fatma Jinnah was seen premiering films. The first film where she was seen premiering was in 1962 in Karachi, a film called Chirag Jalta Raha. And even within the films themselves, we started seeing the advent of political concepts and political views. There was a film released in 1962 called Shaheed, which was actually based on the Palestine issue. And it was very, very popular among the viewers. And similarly, in 1969, we see another film called Zarqa being released, which was again on the Palestine movement. And this film became a huge hit and actually reached the Diamond Jubilee status. And up until the 1960s, the early 60s, Pakistani cinemas also screened Indian films from Bollywood, and they were also quite well liked. But then the war of 1965 took place, and suddenly all the Indian films were pulled from the cinemas and they were eventually completely banned. Some experts in the industry at that time thought that this would really hurt the Pakistani cinema, but the effects were actually quite the opposite. More people actually began to watch Lollywood films and the industry started to flourish even more. And an interesting thing is that a lot of the movies that were being screened in cinemas that were Indian were in the language Urdu, and the films that were being made in Pakistan initially were mostly in regional languages like Pashto, Sindhi, Punjabi. But when these films were banned, the Indian films, that created a vacuum in the cinema industry. And now suddenly, Pakistani film producers were making a lot more Urdu movies, which the audience was receiving very well. We saw filmmakers like Waheed Murad, who was also the actor, yes, they started taking advantage of this and started producing movies in Urdu. And they saw huge rewards with this little risk that they took. Because he released a film called Arman in 1966, and this became the first film in Pakistan to cross more than 75 weeks in theatres, thus becoming the first Platinum Jubilee film. This film also introduced a lot of other characteristics like pop songs like Coco Corina. Other movies during this time period included things like Badnaam, Neela Parbat, Lakhon Mein Ek, Chakori, and even Zinda Lash, which was actually Pakistan's first ever X-rated film, and it was a horror movie. And all of this continued up until the early 1970s. But again, when the War of 1971 broke out, everything changed. Up until this point, Pakistan consisted of two very distinct areas: West Pakistan, which is modern day Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which then became Bangladesh. So by the end of the 1971 war, Pakistan ended up losing half of its area, and that became the new country called Bangladesh. And this had heavy repercussions in the film industry. Firstly, there was a heavy loss of viewership because more than 55% of the total population of Pakistan resided in East Pakistan. When we look at cinemas themselves, the totality of Pakistan had more than 400 cinemas, out of which 100 were actually located in East Pakistan. And secondly, the loss of Dhaka itself was a huge blow because that was a hub for filmmaking. We also saw a repeat of what happened in 1947, where so many talented people in the film industry left Lahore for India, and this time we saw the same thing happening, but then people were leaving West Pakistan for East Pakistan, which was now Bangladesh. And Dhaka itself was actually a very, very important part of the Pakistani film industry. In the year 1970, more than 114 films were actually shot in Dhaka itself. Even producers from West Pakistan would actually go to Dhaka and shoot their movies there because the cost of production was so much lower. The profit margins were much more lucrative. Now, all of these losses actually shook up this industry, which was even till now recovering from the partition of 1947. And now at this point, it was completely shook. And the film industry itself became very, very vulnerable at this point. There were incidents where cinemas were burnt down, like in Quetta, right before the release of Pakistan's first ever film in the Balochi language. But it wasn't like the industry completely crumbled. People were still trying to scrape by, and Pakistan was still trying to do innovative things. It was during this time in 1976 that we saw the creation of Pakistan's first ever feature film in English, which was called Beyond the Mountain. And in 1977, there was the release of a film called Aina. And this film itself was a phenomenal hit because it became the first ever film in Pakistani industry history to ever reach the Crown Jubilee status. It was shown in cinemas for more than 4 years, ranging all the way from 1977 to 1982. But again, just as the industry was trying to gather itself and trying to kind of revive itself from the loss of the 1971 war, the political situation in the country became very, very volatile. On 5th July 1977, the military stepped in, removed the democratically elected government, and General Zia-ul-Haq became the dictator. Now, Zia became a very controversial figure in the history of Pakistan because he made a lot of reforms which had very, very long-lasting effects, even till this day and age. Harsh laws were imposed which kind of brought the media into chains. Print media was totally under the military control and it was heavily censored. Journalists who were against the military dictatorship and were vocal about it were arrested and sent to jail. Not a lot has really changed. At this point, the Pakistani radio and the Pakistani television channels were all owned by the government, and after the military dictatorship came into place, they just became mouthpieces for what the government wanted them to say, rather than actual individualistic channels. Another thing which heavily changed the film industry was the radical Islamization that Zia-ul-Haq wanted to put in place in Pakistan. With these policies, entertainment avenues were kind of banned and people were encouraged to stay within their own homes, especially women. New registration laws for film producers were kind of introduced, which required all of them to have proper degrees. And since a lot of people were working in the industry and they were doing this for generations, they did not have degrees, they had the experience. But now suddenly they were unable to produce films at all. And this led to a sharp decline in the number of films that were being produced in Pakistan. And because of these Islamization policies, a lot of cinemas in Lahore were actually closed down by force. Taxes on the entertainment industry were also increased, hence further reducing the audiences and the already poor margins. And they also introduced a vast array of policies about what can be displayed on screen or not. Any kind of intimacy between couples was heavily discouraged. Any scene where there was dancing, nightclubs, or the use of alcoholic drinks within the scenes was completely banned. And in other cases, things like art films, which kind of focused on the government and kind of challenged what they were doing and criticized them, were taken as a direct attack on the military and were heavily put down. Very, very similar to things going on in certain areas of the world even today. So at this point, the filmmakers basically were out of topics and out of things to talk about because everything was so heavily censored. The production of films dropped from almost 98 films in 1979, of which 42 were in Urdu language, to only 58 films in 1980, of which only 26 were in Urdu language. And this number kept going down every year. Only some Punjabi and Pashto films were able to survive this time period, but the rest of the industry was in shambles. Now, during Zia's time, the situation of the country itself, the law and order situation, wasn't really that good. There were often bomb blasts, and such events did encourage people to actually stay more within their own homes. And this had a very unexpected consequence. In the middle of the 1970s, VCRs had started coming into the picture. And even though it was banned in Pakistan till 1983, it still made its way into the country long before that. And after 1983, VCRs could be found in almost every home. And because the film industry of Pakistan had kind of crumbled by this point and not a lot of films were being released, so a new market started to brew, which was of counterfeit films, which included English films from Hollywood and Indian films from Bollywood. And all of those were smuggled into Pakistan, and suddenly there's a culture change that we see happening. Whereas like a decade or two ago, people, if they want to watch a film, they're going to go to a cinema and watch a film there. Now, people stay in their own homes, they gather together at each other's homes, and they get the movies that they want, the VCRs, and they watch those. But all of this was actually even worse for the Pakistani film industry, because when people tried to pull through the rut and kind of still make films, they weren't very well received. One such film was made in 1989, which was called Shane. This was Pakistan's first ever sci-fi film, and it didn't do very good in Pakistan. But internationally, the film did very, very well. It gained recognition in the Moscow Film Festival, in Egypt, as well as in Korea. By the end of the 1990s, Lollywood had almost completely collapsed, creating less than 40 films a year. This number went further down in 2005 to almost only 20 films a year. Now, if we back up a little, in 1999, Pakistan again went through another military coup. This time, the government of Nawaz Sharif was displaced and General Musharraf came into power. And this dictator actually did not impose all those radical Islamization laws that Zia was so hell-bent on. He actually allowed for the privatization of film channels and gave rise to new channels being introduced into the Pakistani market. And this created some other avenues for an industry which by this point was pretty much dead. So during the 2000s, we actually started seeing some renewed efforts into the film industries, and some really good films actually came out of it. But the numbers that were produced earlier, we haven't been able to match those since then. Movies like War and Khuda Ke Liye actually broke a lot of barriers and they were able to perform really well. And the case of the movie Khuda Ke Liye is actually very, very interesting. It became the first Pakistani film since the ban in 1965 to be premiered in both India and Pakistan at the same time. And since then, we've seen the ban on Indian movies kind of being on and off. For now, currently, they're banned in Pakistan. In the modern era, like this day and age, there are efforts to uplift this film industry, like as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, with movies such as The Legend of Maula Jat. And even though the movie performed really well, it was very well made and did great in theaters. But there's a long way to go for the industry to reach even what it was once before, let alone be able to compete with the rest of the world. And there are a number of significant reasons as to why the film industry isn't doing as well as it could even today. Now, as I've mentioned within my video throughout, that the film industry has been tested again and again, and anytime it starts to get back on its feet, it's basically dropped down again. But now, after the 2000s, we see that efforts are being made to kind of work and make new good quality movies. And then we did start seeing a lot of new cinemas being opened up in Pakistan and a lot of traffic actually going to the cinemas. Now, before this, Now, Indian movies were actually quite popular in Pakistan. They were being screened in cinemas, and this was also a huge contribution as to why new cinemas were being opened up, because the Pakistani film industry at that point wasn't creating as many movies as needed to keep cinemas and theaters sustained. But when 2019 hit, two events took place. Firstly, the whole issue where India ventured into Pakistan's airspace and the Abhinandan issue, all of that happened. And that led to a ban on Indian movies in Pakistan all over again. And secondly, COVID hit. And with that, we saw that a lot of people were again not going out of their homes. They had to stay in their homes. And because of that, a lot of these new cinemas, which had just popped up and the industry was just picking up, again had to close down because suddenly, all of that was unsustainable. Now, there was a survey done in Pakistan in the year 2021, and it was aimed to kind of ask and figure out what Pakistanis thought as to why the film industry is still in decline. If you want to know the methodology of how this survey was done, what the data, how was it collected, and how was it compiled, I'll give you the link and the name of the study down below in my description box. You can go and have a look. But these were the results of the study. More than 60% of the people agreed that a major reason why the film industry is in decline are substandard films. 11% blamed the government and its policies, which does not prioritize the industry. And almost 16% of the people think that film producers are unable to produce quality films. And then we see that 7 and 1% people blame Indian and English films and say that they're responsible for the decline of films in Pakistan due to the availability of TV, DVDs, and now we have things like Netflix, Prime, and whatnot. 7 and 1% people blame English and Indian films for the decline of Pakistani films. They say that because of those films, people don't watch Pakistani films. And then there's also 4 and 1% of people that say that modern technology, which were TVs, DVDs, and also now Netflix, Prime, YouTube, whatnot, also lead to the decline of the Pakistani film industry. So that is what majority of the people actually think. And now when you look at all of these reasons, and you see that a lot of people advocating for banning Indian and English films because they think that will help the Pakistani film industry. But the thing is, in this day and age, with all of the technological advancements, banning other competition is not really the solution. Maybe the competition should be there and our filmmakers should strive to produce content which is worth watching. Now, what do you guys think is the solution to kind of uplifting this film industry again? Do you think banning other mediums is a good idea? Because how will our film industry get any better if we ban all other competition? And with this day and age, with the advent of Netflix, Prime, and everything else that we have, banning also seems like very, very impossible. Healthy competition is never really bad, is it? I do agree with people that say that quality content needs to be made, and we've seen that the public really, really responds well to that. The Legends of Maula Jat didn't just do great because it was a really good cast. It did great because it was well written, well acted. All of the things came together. And we see it in other things as well. For example, nobody in Pakistan watched Turkish dramas ever. I mean, until the advent of some very popular dramas like Mera Sultan and then Ertugrul, which kind of broke down all records and went on a rampage. People got crazy after it. But there's a reason for that, because for the first time, it's original. And that's one of the other things I think lacks very much in the Pakistani film industry, is that even when we do try to make movies, we kind of try and copy people. We copy Bollywood with the addition of item songs and storylines inspired from them, or Hollywood. And a lot of people watching the videos in Pakistan can't really relate to them. And what was once the beauty of Pakistani cinema was that it made relatable original content. And with the case of Ertugrul, we see that if somebody makes content which is original, which relates with people on some level, shows them a new perspective, people definitely do respond. Some other studies, which I'm not talking about in this video, also mentioned that PEMRA itself, which is the censor board in Pakistan, is a huge hurdle to good quality content, because any movies which talk about social issues or things which the government sees unfit to talk about, they're banned. And some of these movies or shows are phenomenal. So let me know what you guys think, how these things can be made better. This video was more about the issues and what the industry has gone through, what the solutions are, and how things can get better. That's a whole other debate and a whole other conversation. Now, one thing I personally feel that there are sometimes I find Pakistani movies which have Pakistani stars, Pakistani producers, directors, but they're released abroad or they're released in platforms in India. And when I watch the trailers, I'm like, wow, this looks great. But I don't have access to them. I can't watch them anywhere, which is very, very devastating. So I don't know. I mean, if we could work on some platforms where Pakistani film producers could make those films available, which Temra doesn't want us to watch, like on Netflix or on any other platform which does actually pay them good as well, that would be great. Does anybody else have this issue? So let me know down in the comments what you thought of this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.